Gustave Albin Whitehead, born Gustave Albin Weisskopf, was an aviation pioneer who emigrated from Germany to the United States, where he designed and built gliders, flying machines, and engines between 1897 and 1915. While controversy surrounds published accounts and Whitehead's own claims that he flew a powered machine successfully several times in 1901 and 1902, predating the first flights by the Wright Brothers in 1903. Whitehead was born in Lüdechausen, Bavaria. As a boy, he showed an interest in flight, experimenting with kites and earning the nickname the Flyer. He and a friend caught and tethered birds in an attempt to learn how they flew. His parents died in 1886 and 1887 when he was a boy. He then trained as a mechanic and traveled to Hamburg, where in 1888 he was forced to join the crew of a sailing ship. A year later he returned to Germany, then journeyed with a family to Brazil. He went to sea again for several years, learning more about wind, weather, and bird flight. Weisskopf arrived in the U.S. in 1893. He soon anglicized his name to Gustave Whitehead. The New York toy manufacturer E.I. Horseman hired Whitehead to build and operate advertising kites and model gliders. Whitehead also made plans to add a motor to propel one of his gliders. In 1893, Whitehead was in Boston, where he experimented with gliders, kites, and models, and where he worked at Harvard's kite-flying meteorological station. In 1896, Whitehead was hired as a mechanic for the Boston Aeronautical Society. He and mechanic Albert B.C. Horn built a Lilienthal-type glider and an ornithopter. Whitehead made a few short and low flights in the glider, but did not succeed in flying the ornithopter. Also in 1896, founding society member Samuel Cabot employed Whitehead and carpenter James Crowell to build a Lilienthal glider. Cabot reported to the society that tests with this glider were unsuccessful. In the 1930s, a magazine article and book asserted that Whitehead had made powered flights in 1901 to 1902. The book includes statements from people who said that they had seen various Whitehead flights decades earlier. These published accounts triggered debate among scholars, researchers, and aviation enthusiasts. Mainstream historians have consistently dismissed the Whitehead flight claims, which Orville Wright later described as mythical. Researchers have studied and attempted to copy Whitehead aircraft. Since the 1980s, enthusiasts in the U.S. and Germany have built and flown replicas of Whitehead's No. 21 machine using modern engines and modern propellers, and with fundamental changes to the aircraft structure and control systems. 1899. According to an affidavit given in 1934 by Louis Darvich, a friend of Whitehead, the two men made a motorized flight of about half a mile in Pittsburgh's Skinley Park in April or May 1899. Darvich said they flew at a height of 20 to 25 feet in a steam-powered monoplane aircraft and crashed into a brick building. Darvich said he was stoking the aircraft's boiler aboard the craft and was badly scalded in the accident, requiring several weeks in a hospital. Because of this incident, Whitehead was forbidden by the police to perform any more experiments in Pittsburgh. Aviation historian William F. Trimble, pointing to a lack of contemporary proof, dismissed this story in 1982 as a case of overactive imaginations. Whitehead's stated control method was a shifting of body weight and was said by Trimble to be insufficient to control a powered aircraft. And the supposed charcoal-fired steam power plant could not have been powerful enough to lift itself off the ground. Whitehead was quoted in Pittsburgh newspapers in December 1899 as still constructing an aircraft, although he did say that he had flown it in Boston. A local historian claimed in 2015 that his research has uncovered evidence of the purported 1899 flight. 1901. The aviation event for which Whitehead is now best known reportedly took place in Fairfield, Connecticut, on August 14, 1901. It was described in an article from the edition of the 18th of August, 1901 in the weekly Bridgeport Herald newspaper. The article, written as an eyewitness report, stated that Whitehead piloted his No. 21 aircraft in a controlled powered flight for about half a mile, reaching a height of 50 feet and landing safely. The flight preceded the Wright Brothers' first powered flights near Kitty Hawk in 1903 by more than 2 years and exceeded the best one, which covered 852 feet at a height of about 10 feet. The article was accompanied by a drawing, also credited by some Whitehead researchers to Howell, which depicted the aircraft in flight. The drawing was purportedly based on a photograph. Information from the article was reprinted in the New York Herald, Boston Transcript, and the Washington Times, which ran it on August 23, 1901. In the following months, dozens of other newspapers around the world published articles mentioning the reported flight or other aviation activity by Whitehead. 1902. Whitehead claimed 2 spectacular flights on the 17th of January, 1902 in his improved number 22, with a 40 horsepower motor instead of the 20 horsepower used in the number 21, and aluminum instead of bamboo for structural components. In 2 published letters he wrote to American Inventor magazine, Whitehead said the flights took place over Long Island Sound. He said the distance of the first flight was about 2 miles and the second was 7 miles in a circle at heights up to 200 feet. He said the airplane, which had a boat-like fuselage, landed safely in the water near the shore. For steering, Whitehead said he varied the speed of the 2 propellers and also used the aircraft rudder. He said the techniques worked well on his second flight and enabled him to fly a big circle back to the shore where his helpers waited. In his first letter, he expressed pride in the accomplishment. As I successfully returned to my starting place with a machine hitherto untried and heavier than air, I consider the trip quite a success. To my knowledge, it is the first of its kind. In his second letter he wrote, "This coming spring I will have photographs made of machine number 22 in the air." He said snapshots, apparently taken during his claimed flights of January 17, 1902, did not come out right because of cloudy and rainy weather. The magazine editor replied that he and readers would await with interest the promised photographs of the machine in the air, but there were no further letters nor any photographs from Whitehead. A 1935 article in Popular Aviation magazine, which renewed interest in Whitehead, said winter weather ruined the number 22 airplane after Whitehead placed it unprotected in his yard following his claimed flights of January 1902. The article said Whitehead did not have money to build a shelter for the aircraft because of a quarrel with his financial backer. The article also reported that in early 1903, Whitehead built a 200 horsepower 8-cylinder engine intended to power a new aircraft. Another financial backer insisted on testing the engine in a boat on Long Island Sound, but the boat lost control and capsized, sending the engine to the bottom. In 1963, Reserve Air Force Major William O'Dwyer discovered photographs in the attic of a Connecticut house showing a 1910 Whitehead large albatross-type biplane. The Connecticut Aeronautical Historical Association asked him and his U.S. Air Force Reserve Squadron to investigate whether Whitehead had made powered flights. O'Dwyer continued his research for years and became convinced that Whitehead did fly before the Wright brothers. The former CAHA President Harvey Lippincott said in 1981 that Whitehead may have flown 100 to 200 feet, 10 to 15 feet off the ground. This is confirmed by the witnesses that we have interviewed and talked with, and this seems reasonable for the state of the art in aviation at that time. O'Dwyer later contributed interviews of reputed flight witnesses to a second book by Stella Randolph, The Story of Gustave Whitehead, Before the Wrights Flew, published in 1966. O'Dwyer and Randolph also co-authored History by Contract, published in 1978, which criticized the Smithsonian Institution for signing an agreement with the estate of Orville Wright, requiring the Smithsonian to credit only the 1903 Wright Flyer for the first powered, controlled flight. No photograph has been found conclusively showing any manned Whitehead machine in powered flight, although such photographs have been reported to exist. The Bridgeport Daily Standard reported on the 1st of October 1904 that pictures were exhibited in the window of Lyon and Grumman's hardware store on Main Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut, showing Whitehead in his airplane about 20 feet from the ground and sailing along. The article said, of course he has not perfected his invention, but says that he has frequently flown over half a mile. There are people who believe Whitehead is all that the newspapers have represented him to be. The photographs show that he has the ability to make short flights. A photo was displayed in the 1906 first annual exhibit of the Aero Club of America at the 69th Regiment Armory in New York City, which showed an unpiloted Whitehead aircraft in flight. The photo was mentioned in the 27th of January, 1906 Scientific American article, which stated that the walls of the exhibit were covered with a large collection of photographs showing the machines of various inventors. The report said, no photographs of a man-carrying machine in flight were shown, nor has any trustworthy account of their reported achievements ever been published. A single blurred photograph of a large bird-like machine propelled by compressed air constructed by Whitehead in 1901 was the only other photograph besides that of Samuel Pierpont Langley's scale model machines of a motor-driven aeroplane in successful flight. Peter L. Jacob, National Air and Space Museum Associate Director and Curator of Early Flight, suggested that the image may very well have been an in-flight photograph of one of Whitehead's gliders. In 2013, Australian researcher John Brown analyzed the panoramic photograph from the 1906 Aero Club exhibit room, which shows photographic images on the wall in the background. Brown concluded that one of the images, which he examined by greatly enlarging it, was the long-lost photo of Whitehead's number 21 in powered flight. He said that the image also correlated with the drawing that was published in the 1901 Bridgeport Herald article, which reported a Whitehead flight. Brown's conclusion was disputed by aviation historian Carol Gray, who said that a clear archival photograph is virtually identical to the enlarged image and proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the wall image from the 1906 exhibit showed the glider the California, built by aviation pioneer John Joseph Montgomery, on display suspended between trees at an exhibit in a California park in 1905. Purported meeting with the Wright brothers. In the 1930s, Whitehead was said by 3 witnesses to have helped the Wright brothers by revealing his secrets perhaps 2 years prior to their first powered flights. Statements obtained by Stella Randolph in the 1930s from 2 of Whitehead's workers, Cecil Steeves and Anton Pruckner, claimed that the Wright brothers visited Whitehead's shop a year or 2 before their 1903 flights. The January 1988 Air Enthusiast magazine states, both Cecil Steeves and Junius Harworth remember the Wrights. Steeves described them and recalled their telling Weisskopf that they had received his letter indicating an exchange of correspondence. Steeves said that the Wright brothers, under the guise of offering to help finance his inventions, actually received inside information that aided them materially in completing their own plane. Steeves related that Whitehead said to him, "Now since I have given them the secrets of my invention, they will probably never do anything in the way of financing me." Orville Wright denied that he or his brother ever visited Whitehead at his shop and stated that the first time they were in Bridgeport was 1909 and then only in passing through on the train. Replica aircraft. To show that the number 21 aircraft might have flown, Connecticut high school science teacher Andy Kosh, a pilot, built a replica of the craft, using existing photos and blueprints created by experts working with O'Dwyer in a project called Hangar 21. The replica used modern ultralight engines and included other substantive changes. On December 29, 1986, Kosh flew the replica and claimed a distance of about 330 feet at 6 feet above the ground. On the 18th of February, 1998, another reproduction of number 21 was flown 500 meters, 1,600 feet, in Germany. The director of the aerospace department at Deutsches Museum noted that such a replica was not proof that the original did actually fly. The 1998 reproduction used modern research and materials such as fiberglass and had modern engines, along with other changes. The Smithsonian Institution and the Wright brothers contract. Reports that Whitehead made a flight in Connecticut were noticed by the Smithsonian Institution. Smithsonian Secretary Samuel Langley was at the time building his manned aircraft, the Langley Aerodrome A. Langley's chief engineer, Charles M. Manley, suspected claims for the Whitehead machine were fraudulent. He asked Smithsonian employee F.W. Hodge to inspect the number 21 aircraft, which Whitehead had put on display in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Hodge reported the machine did not appear to be airworthy. For many years, the Smithsonian Institution did not formally recognize the 1903 Wright Flyer as the first successful aircraft. Instead, it proclaimed the Langley Aerodrome as first to be capable of man-powered flight. This policy offended the surviving Wright brother, Orville, who sent the Wright Flyer to the Science Museum in London on long-term loan, rather than donate it to the Smithsonian. In 1942, the Smithsonian publicly recanted its position, and Orville agreed to bring back the Flyer. As a condition for receiving the airplane, the Smithsonian signed an agreement in 1948 with executors of Orville Wright's estate. Popularly called a contract, the agreement required the Smithsonian to recognize only the 1903 Wright Flyer, and no other aircraft, as first to make a manned, powered, controlled flight. The agreement, which was not made public, allowed the Wright family to reclaim the Flyer if the Smithsonian failed to comply. In 1975, O'Dwyer learned about the agreement from Harold S. Miller, an executor of the Orville Wright estate. O'Dwyer obtained release of the document with help from Connecticut U.S. Senator Lowell Weicker and the U.S. Freedom of Information Act. O'Dwyer said that during an earlier 1969 conversation with Paul E. Garber, a Smithsonian curator of early aircraft, Garber denied that a contract existed and said he could never agree to such a thing. The 1978 book co-authored by O'Dwyer and Randolph, History by Contract, argued that the Smithsonian compromised its objectivity when it signed a 1948 agreement with the estate of Orville Wright requiring the institution to recognize the 1903 Wright Flyer as the first aircraft to make a manned, powered, controlled flight or forfeit possession of the aircraft. The book published correspondence between O'Dwyer and the Smithsonian in which he asked the institution to look at the evidence and to attend interviews of people who said they saw Whitehead fly. The book called for nullification of the agreement. George Gunther, a Connecticut state senator, said History by Contract was too heavy-handed. Gunther said he had been having cordial conversations with the Smithsonian about giving some credit to Whitehead, but after O'Dwyer blasted them in his book, well, that totally turned them off. According to the Smithsonian, the agreement was implemented to close the long-running feud with the Wright family over the institution's false claims for the aerodrome. Brinchman documented that Gardner and Findley, who helped Orville rebut the Whitehead claims, also participated in crafting text in the agreement that the institution is required to use in its labeling of the Wright Flyer. The agreement remains in effect to the present day. In 2005, Peter Jacob of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum said the agreement would not stop the Smithsonian from recognizing anyone as inventor of the first airplane if indisputable evidence were found. We would present as accurate a presentation of the history of the invention of the airplane as possible, regardless of the consequences this might incur involving the agreement. Having said that, however, at this time, as in 1948, there is no compelling evidence that Whitehead or anyone else flew before the Wright brothers. In 2013, the National Air and Space Museum's senior aeronautics curator Tom Crouch said, "I can only hope that, should persuasive evidence for a prior flight be presented, my colleagues and I would have the courage and the honesty to admit the new evidence and risk the loss of the Wright Flyer." Later career. In addition to his work on flying machines, Whitehead built engines. In 1904, he attended the St. Louis World's Fair and displayed an aeronautical motor. Air Enthusiast wrote, Weisskopf's ability and mechanical skill could have made him a wealthy man at a time when there was an ever-increasing demand for lightweight engines, but he was far more interested in flying. Instead, Whitehead only accepted enough engine orders to sustain aviation experiments. His aeronautical work was described in a chapter titled The Conquest of the Air in a 1904 book, Modern Industrial Progress, by Charles Henry Cochran. The book said Whitehead had experimented with a 3-deck machine and attached a 12-horsepower motor driving a tractor propeller after tests showed the craft could carry more than his weight. Tests of the machine were described as sufficiently satisfactory that another is being built. In 1908, Whitehead designed and built a 75-horsepower lightweight 2-cycle motor at the suggestion of aviation pioneer George Lawrence, who was having difficulty obtaining an aeronautic engine. The water-cooled machine was designed so that functional cylinders continued to work if others failed, a safety factor to help avoid accidents due to engine failure. The men formed Whitehead Motor Works with an office in New York City and a factory in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that built motors in 3 sizes, 25, 40, and 75 horsepower, weighing 95 145 and 200 pounds respectively. Whitehead's business practices were unsophisticated and he was sued by a customer, resulting in a threat that his tools and equipment would be seized. He hid his engines and most of his tools in a neighbor's cellar and continued his aviation work. One of his engines was installed by aviation pioneer Charles Whitman in a helicopter built by Lee Borage of the Aero Club of America, but the craft failed to fly. Whitehead's own 1911 studies of the vertical flight problem resulted in a 60-bladed helicopter, which, unmanned, lifted itself off the ground. He lost an eye in a factory accident and also suffered a severe blow to the chest from a piece of factory equipment, an injury that may have led to increasing attacks of angina. Despite these setbacks, he exhibited an aircraft at Hempstead, New York, as late as 1915. He continued to work and invent. He designed a braking safety device, hoping to win a prize offered by a railroad. He demonstrated it as a scale model but won nothing. He constructed an automatic concrete laying machine, which he used to help build a road north of Bridgeport. These inventions brought him no more profit than did his airplanes and engines. Around 1915, Whitehead worked in a factory as a laborer and repaired motors to support his family. He died of a heart attack on October 10, 1927, after attempting to lift an engine out of a car he was repairing. He stumbled onto his front porch and into his home, then collapsed dead in the house. Rediscovery. Whitehead's work remained mostly unknown to the public and aeronautical community after 1911 until a 1935 article was published in Popular Aviation magazine, co-authored by educator and journalist Stella Randolph and Harvey Phillips. Randolph expanded the article into the book Lost Flights of Gustave Whitehead, published in 1937. She sought out people who had known Whitehead and had seen his flying machines and engines, and she obtained 16 affidavits from 14 people and included the text of their statements in the book. 4 people said that they did not see flights, while the others said that they saw flights of various types, ranging from a few feet to hundreds of feet to more than a mile. In May 2012, John Brown had discussions with the Smithsonian's chief historian. He became aware of the controversy involved with Whitehead's legacy and decided to investigate further. In the course of his ongoing research, he discovered more than 400 old newspaper articles, more than 100 of which described pre-1903 powered flights by Whitehead. He sent them to both the Gustave Weisskopf Museum and the Smithsonian Institute, recommending further action. However, it was only when the Gustave Weisskopf Museum staff indicated it lacked the resources to follow up on his discoveries and the Smithsonian expressed little interest, that John decided to conduct a full investigation beyond the scope of the roadability of Whitehead's aircraft and addressing the issue of first flight. Upon completion of his research, John sent his findings, including evidence of the existence of a photo of Whitehead in powered flight, to aviation history's highest authority, Jane's All the World's Aircraft. After an examination of the material, Jane's concurred with John's findings, culminating on March 8, 2013, in the official recognition of Gustave Whitehead as the first person in history to have performed a powered, sustained, controlled flight on August 14, 1901. So what do you think? Could Gustave have been the first to sustain powered flight? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.